honey no one, 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 honey.
Welcome to Lesson 16 of the Mountain Maidu language class. This is the first lesson of Intermediate Maidu. How do people go about revitalizing an endangered language? Probably the best way would be immersion, having a bunch of fluent speakers only talk in the language, and let children hang out and soak it up. Children are really good at picking up a language just by listening to other people talk to each other. Eventually, they try it out, and if they say something wrong, they get corrected or maybe laughed at, and that makes them aware that they don't quite have it right yet. And so eventually, the children also become fluent speakers. But what do you do if you have no fluent speakers, and in fact, no native speakers at all? By native speaker, I mean someone who learned the language as their very first language. When you try to have classes, it often comes down to learning individual words and a few greetings, but no way to talk about how your day went, or current events, or history, or teaching how to split maple for baskets. How can we get from just a few recordings and stories written a long time ago to a large community of people speaking the language every day? It sounds impossible, right? What if I told you a story about a language with no native speakers left, a language that was considered dead and was brought back to life? Suppose this language not only did not have any native speakers left, but it had not had a native speaker in, would you believe, 1,800 years. All they had was written stories, poems, prayers, and speeches. Really old stories, poems, prayers, and speeches. They didn't even have recordings to listen to tell them how to pronounce the words. On top of that, the people whose ancestors spoke that language had spread out all over the world and spoke the languages of the countries where they grew up in. They still used the prayers in their religion, but everybody pronounced the words differently based on the language they grew up with. A group of these descendants decided they wanted to bring this language back. They got together and had meetings about it, but of course, everybody disagreed on how to do it and whether it was even okay to have everyday words like motorcycle or toilet paper in this language that they were used to having just for their religion. Of course, everyone thought that everyone else was pronouncing the words wrong. And they disagreed on how it should be written down. It would have been tempting to give up and forget the whole idea. What an impossible task it seemed to be. But they didn't give up. They compromised and they pushed for it. They studied and learned the language from what they had. Then they taught the children. And so this language went from 0 native speakers to over 5 million native speakers today. That language is Hebrew. So it's not impossible. When Ben Yehuda started working on this in the 1800s, he made a dictionary with only the words he could find in all the Hebrew writings. That dictionary was about the size of our Maidu dictionary, 7,000 to 8,000 words. Then they had to make up words for all the modern items that were missing. That's what we're going to try to do in this intermediate class. And of course, they had to figure out the grammar based on how it had been written all those centuries earlier. That's how I'm figuring out the grammar and teaching you how did native speakers of Maidu put their words together. Let's try to do it like they did. Once we can get a good group of Maidu people speaking the language correctly, they could teach the children. Ben Yehuda and his wife did this with their son. They made sure he didn't hear any language except Hebrew from the time he was born. That must have been challenging to pull off. But that kid became the first native speaker of Hebrew in 18 centuries. So there's hope for bringing back Maidu. It won't be easy, but not impossible either. It's up to the Maidu people and what they want for the future. So, today's grammar. complex sentences. Before we start listening to the Maidu recordings, we still have some very important grammar to cover. In the first 3 lessons of Intermediate Maidu, I will introduce you to complex sentences. You can't really expect to understand any Maidu recording until you know about complex sentences. So we'll spend at least 3 lessons on this before getting to the recordings. We've been focusing on simple sentences so far. A simple sentence has an action and a subject, the one doing the action. A complex sentence adds on one or more partial sentences to the simple sentence. Let's review simple sentences before we get to complex sentences. I'll read you some simple sentences from last lesson's dialogue, and I want you to tell me what is the main verb. Main verbs have an ending that tells who's doing the action. Peke pebos chilikas. Do you remember what this means? Peke pebos chilikas. The main verb is pebos chilikas, or pe, eat. You can tell because kas is one of those endings that tells who's doing the action. Kas means I did it. What is the action? Pe. Or you could have said the whole verb, including the infixes. Pebos chili, not be able to eat all. Peke pebos chili kas, I couldn't eat all the food. So that's a simple sentence. We know who and we know the action. How about this one? Minky burger yahat sudakade. What is the main verb? Sudakade, or you could have said suda. You know this because sudakade has one of those endings telling who, kade. And who does kade refer to? He, she, it, or they. In this case, it's the burger, it. Here's another one from last time's dialogue. Tetet yahat doti penkakan. What's the main verb? Okay, not much of an action, but kakan is the main verb. Is. You can tell by the kan ending. It tells who is doing it. What is the subject? It. It is very delicious. Third person. Could be he, she, it, or they. Kan. Instead of always saying he, she, it, or they, we can just say third person for short. Third person means he, she, it, or they. Here's a harder one. Ba nik soyap. Remember this one? What's the action? Soya, pass. Who's doing the action? Tricky. You. When you tell somebody to pass the salt, the subject is you, whoever you're talking to. Remember, commands to other people can have the ending P, P-I, or just the letter P, or no ending at all. The subject is you for these commands. What about the question? Mi no no wea ka? What's the action? Wea, speak. Who is the subject, the one that's telling the jokes? You. The ka ending shows you it's a question directed at somebody. You is the person you're asking. Are you telling jokes? Mi no no wea ka? What about this one? Nik odato unidi. Meet me here. What's the action or verb? Odato, meet. Who's the subject? There's no ending on the verb odato. That's because it's a command. When you're commanding somebody, who is the subject? You. You meet me here. Even if you don't say you, it's understood that the person you're talking to is the one you want to do the action. You. So all of these are simple sentences. As you can see, a simple sentence can be a question, a command, or just a regular statement. And it feels complete because we know the action and who did it or who will do the action. Let's review the verb endings that we know that tell us who is doing the action. There are about 25 of them, so make sure you can recognize them. This is how you're going to find the main verb and the main simple sentence in a complex sentence. These endings are first person for I. For a statement, it's kas. Past tense, as. Questions, ades. All these mean the same subject, I. First person dual, we two. Statements, ankas. Past tense, ahas or aas. Questions, adehas or adeas. First person plural, we all or we more than two. Statements, it's going to be enkes. Past tense, es or ehes. Questions, ades or adehes. Notice that all the first persons, I, we two, and we all, end in s. Second person, you, is going to be ano, either ankano or ano for statements. For questions, it's going to be ka. Commands can either have no ending, a pi, or maankano. Third person, he, she, it, or they statements end in kan. Past tense can be am or a, like choya, choyam. On, like in kausan. Remember, used to be kausan, that ends in an. For questions, ade or kare. We still have a few more endings to learn later on in Intermediate Maidu, but make sure you know these that we've already covered. So, a complex sentence is the main sentence plus one or more partial sentences. A simple or partial sentence can be called a clause. Since clause sounds like bear's claws, let's picture the parts of a complex sentence as a mama bear and her cub or cubs. The main clause, which is the main sentence we've just been talking about, is the mama bear. And partial sentences are dependent clauses, like bear cubs who are dependent on their mom. They can't get along by themselves, but they need to hang out with her. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about one kind of dependent clause where the verb ends in dom. You thought you knew dom, right? Just like English ing, right? You've learned about dom as a verb partner with equal sign helping verbs like kakan, kausan, and machoyam. Kakan weadom means ongoing incomplete action. He is speaking right now. Well, it turns out dom is so much more than a verb partner. Dom is like a friend that you keep learning more about, like, I didn't know you were an artist. Then later, I didn't know you could play guitar. And later, I didn't know you could speak Chinese. The dom ending has a lot of talents, and we'll keep learning about different talents as we go. Today, we'll learn about the dom ending showing a dependent clause when it doesn't have any helping verb. The dom ending does not tell you who is doing the action, so even though it's impressive, it can never be the main verb of a sentence. In Maidu, only the main sentence has a verb ending that tells who is doing the action. Dependent clauses using dom cannot tell us who is doing the action. All they can tell us is that they are the same subject as the main sentence. They are mama bear. It so happens I threw in some complex sentences in last lesson's dialogue without telling you about it. I hope you remember these sentences and what they mean. Let's take a look at them. Pe yahadom pe maankano. Do you remember what that means? If you want to eat, eat. Even though this is only 2 words, it's a complex sentence. A main clause plus a dependent clause. Can you tell which is the main clause? You're looking for an ending that tells who is doing the action. We know that ankano means you. are doing the action. So this has to be the mama bear of the sentence, the main part. You will eat. Pemankano. What about peyahadom? What does that mean? Wanting to eat. You know that the dom ending is like ing in English. Even though it's a verb ending, it can't be the main verb because the dom ending doesn't tell you who's doing the action, right? So, this is a partial sentence, wanting to eat. It's a dependent clause that can't be on its own. But you can say it as part of the complex sentence. Wanting to eat, eat. Now, in English, would you really say wanting to eat, eat? I don't think so. In English, you would say, if you want to eat, eat. That sounds better. But how do I know to put the you in there, if you want to eat? The answer is that dependent clauses that end in dom take the same subject as the main clause. The main clause is pemankano. You will eat. What's the subject? You. We know this because of the ankano ending. The dependent clause is peyahadom. Since it ends in dom, has the same subject as the main clause. In this case, you. So when we translate it into English, we can repeat that subject. If you want to eat, you will eat. Or if you want to eat, eat. In this lesson, we'll focus on dependent clauses that end in dom and how they always have the same subject as the main clause. In a couple of lessons, we'll get to the dependent clauses that have a different subject and do not use dom. Now, back to the complex sentences I snuck into last lesson's dialogue. Here's another one. Behunke bolcheadom. Lewon minki fries peyahakas. First, we want to identify the main clause, the mama bear. Remember, you're looking for a word ending that tells us who is doing it. Can you find it? If you said kas or peyahakas, you're right. The kas ending shows who's doing the action, and that is I. So the main clause is lewon minki fries peyahakas. I want to eat some of your fries. The dependent clause ends in dom. Behunke bolcheadom. Literally, this means a fork waiting for, or waiting for a fork. Would you ever say it like that in English? No. But we can understand it. Waiting for a fork, I want some of your fries. Sounds too formal in English. The part that means waiting for a fork, we have to translate while I wait for a fork. Again, where do we get the I? From the main clause. The main clause is lewon minki fries peyahakas. What is the subject of this main clause? I. How do we know? Because of the kas ending. So we translate the dependent clause behunke bolcheadom as while I wait for a fork. You give the cub the same subject as the mama bear. Now let's look at the third sentence. Unidi uyedom kas tetet okmadom. When I come here, I intend to be very hungry. What's the main sentence, the mama bear, which has a verb ending telling who's the subject? Kas tetet okmadom. What is the subject? I. We know this because of kas. That can only be I. In this case, okmadom is a verb partner for kas. Remember that words in dom can be verb partners too, as we already learned. So that's part of the main clause. I intend to be very hungry. Now, what is the dependent clause? Unidi uyedom. Unidi uyedom doesn't give us any information about who's doing the action. That's because it's dependent on the main clause for its subject. Literally, this means, to this place coming, I intend to be very hungry. Again, we wouldn't usually say it this way in English. Can you guess how you would translate this into good-sounding English? We would have to say, when I come here, I intend to be very hungry. Or you could translate it as, if I come here, I intend to be very hungry. As you can see, I added in 3 different words in the 3 sentences, if, while, and when. The word ending in dom can be interpreted in these 3 ways, plus other ways, like because and since. You have to pick the one that fits the situation best. Let's try these choices with those 3 sentences, and you'll see that it's easier than it sounds. Peyahadom pemankano. You could translate it, when you want to eat, eat. Or, while you want to eat, eat. Or, since you want to eat, eat. Because you want to eat, eat. If you want to eat, eat. You could see that more than one of these translations would make sense in the dialogue situation. Part of the creativity in translating is that you have a few choices. When you're translating into English, you want to make it sound good, not awkward. Now that you know some of the translation choices you have with the dependent clause in dom, let's try the choices out on the next sentence. Behunka bolcheadom, lewon minki fries peyahakas. While I'm waiting for a fork, I want to eat some of your fries. If I'm waiting for a fork, I want to eat some of your fries. Since I'm waiting for a fork, I want to eat some of your fries. Because I'm waiting for a fork, I want to eat some of your fries. When I'm waiting for a fork, I want to eat some of your fries. Since definitely sounds good. Some of these sound better than others. Now let's look at the 3rd sentence. Unidi yedom kastetet okmadom. When I come here, I intend to be very hungry. If I come here, I intend to be very hungry. While I come here, I intend to be very hungry. Since I come here, I intend to be very hungry. Because I come here, I intend to be very hungry. Since and because don't sound quite right, but both if and when sound good. When you're trying to say a complex sentence in Maidu, you might be tempted to look in the dictionary for words like if, when, since, because, and while. Remember that instead of using one of those words like we would in English, we're going to use the dom ending, as long as the subject is the same as the main clause. Now let's listen to some native speakers using complex sentences with a dependent clause in dom. As we get further into these recordings, I'm going to play them with whatever stuttering or self-correcting the speaker really uses. In beginning Maidu, I would usually cut this out to avoid confusion. But now, you're ready to hear the native speaker just talking naturally. So you can do the same when you're speaking spontaneously. Listen to Mame Gallagher. Let's see how we can translate what she says into English.
Tem unoy usasum sol pem pinke yahadam. Pinkeno yahadam.
You can hear her stutter a little and then correct herself. What's the main verb that shows who is doing the action? Teta anoia usas. We know this because of the usas ending. That's the used to past tense. Who used to go around playing? I. The usas ending can only be for I. So the main clause, or mama bear, is tete anoia usas. I used to go around playing. What is the dependent clause that ends in dom? Pinkanu yaharam. What does that mean? Wanting to listen to. What does the whole sentence mean? I used to play around wanting to listen to that which sang, mum solpe. This already sounds pretty good in English, but maybe we can make it a little better. One, she's talking about a machine's hum that she liked to hear when she was little. Maybe we could change the translation to wanting to listen to that humming thing or something like that. And if we wanted to add in one of our words like since, because, if, when, or while, what would make sense? Remember to repeat I from the main clause. I used to play around because I wanted to listen to that thing humming. I used to play around when I wanted to listen to that thing humming. I used to play around if I wanted to listen to that thing humming. See how all these make sense? This shows how you have some leeway and some creativity in how you translate from Maidu to English. Let's listen to Mame Gallagher again and repeat after her.
Tem unoiusas mun solpe mun pinke jahadom. Pinkenu jahadom.
Now let's try another one from Mame Gallagher.
Kakuma jahat inyanawe pem te jahat pindom.
Is there a verb ending that shows you who is the subject of the main clause? Kukumaas means I was. Do you remember that verb tense? It's past tense at least a few days ago. So that must be the main clause because the verb shows who's doing the action. Kukumaas yahat inyana wayapem. I was a very good Indian speaker. Wayapem, one who speaks. Inyana, the Indian language, meaning Maidu. Let's repeat this sentence. I was a very good Indian language speaker. Kukumaas yahat inyana wayapem. Now let's translate the dependent clause with the dome word, pindom. Tetet yahat pindom, hearing very well. Pindom, hearing, can also mean paying attention. I was a very good Indian language speaker, paying attention very well. What's another way of translating the dependent clause, paying attention very well? First, we take the same subject as the main clause. What is that? I. Then try out the connecting words we talked about. I was a very good Indian language speaker because I paid attention very well. Or, I was a very good Indian language speaker since I paid attention very well. If, when, and while don't really work here, but because and since both do. So here are the steps you want to take. First, you identify the main clause. It will have a verb ending that tells who is the subject. After you translate the main clause, translate the dependent clause using ing for the dome word, ing. Then you fix it to sound better in English. Use the same subject as the main clause and choose which word you will use, if, when, while, since, or because. Here's another one from Mame Gallagher. Mame Gallagher sometimes says iska, which is like saying or in English. Repeat iska. Now, when you feel like saying or you can't remember a word, say iska. In the old Tom Young stories, he used this word once to mean something, kind of like, what do you call it? Back to Mame Gallagher's sentence. What is the main verb that tells who's doing the action? Pinkanu kumas. What does that mean? I listened. Yahat pinkanu kumas. I listened well. It's the main clause. It can stand all by itself as a sentence. It's the mama bear. Now, what is the dependent clause? Badoy kinudong iska sam inkidi. What does that mean? Sitting around by the fire. Sam inkidi means by the side of the fire. Repeat, sam inkidi. Now repeat, badoy kinudom sam inkidi. You remember badoykit, sit down. If you add the infix nu, this means the action lasts longer. That's why I translated it as sitting around, or you could say being seated. Badoy kinudom sam inkidi. Being seated by the fire or sitting around by the fire. Now, put this dependent clause with the main clause, and how would you translate? Yahat pin kinu kuumas, badoy kinudom iska sam inkidi. I listened well, sitting around by the fire. How would you make the English translation a little better by adding the same subject as the main clause and one of the word choices because, while, when, if, or since? I listened well while I was sitting around by the fire. Or you could use when, or even if, but maybe not because or since. Here's another from Mame Gallagher.
Volim akumen ingoroi macam ti ibinonam meitakum kubot kapem elum wasasa skadom seldom.
What is the verb that shows who the subject is? Machoyam. We know from machoyam that the subject is third person, he, she, it, or they. Now translate the main clause, the part that includes machoyam. Whites at that time in this country apparently owned a bunch of little stores. Do you remember the Kupem construction having with machoyam apparently had? What did they have? Tibibi nonom metokum habo, a bunch of little stores. The main clause is wolum akumen uninkodoidi machoyam tibibi nonom metokum habo kupem. When she says iskadom, it's like saying with ing on the end, almost like saying, what were they doing? Then she remembers. She ends up using the English word for sell, seldom, and that is the dependent clause, selling. Now translate the dependent clause, helum wasasa iskadom seldom. You could say, selling a few things, or selling a few things. So, what does the whole complex sentence mean? Whites at that time apparently had a bunch of little stores, selling a few things. In this case, you might not want to add any of our words because, since, when, while, or if to the dependent clause. You might just leave it as it is, or even add the word and in English. Whites at that time apparently had a bunch of little stores, and they were selling a few things. I repeated the subject of the main clause, they, referring to whites. Here's another from Mame Gallagher.
Tos donino kumas.
You remember don, catch. The new infix shows that the action is lasting. After a consonant like an in don, nu becomes inu. What do you think doninu means? Hold on. You're not just catching it, you're just keeping on, holding it and grasping it. How would you translate the main clause, doninu cum mas? I held on. How would you translate the dependent clause, etos dom? Etos means be strong. Etos dom, being strong. Being strong, I held on. Could you improve it by adding the same subject and one of the connecting words? Since I was strong, I held on. Or, because I was strong, I held on. Here's another from Mame Gallagher.
Heu. Che Dominic Madon Dominic Widok Hak Oi. Hobom Q now.
This is actually two sentences. You can tell because there are two verbs with endings telling who is doing the action. Cheheyep, look around. What's the subject? You. Widok hakoi, lead by the hand. Who? It doesn't have an ending, so it's a command. Who is the subject? You. Hel cheheyep adom nik ma don dom nik widok hakoi habong kuna. Okay, look around. That's a complete sentence. Then she starts the next sentence with adom. We usually translate adom as and, but what does it really mean? Ah, that short little verb means say or do. Adom means while doing it or while doing so. It's okay to translate it as and, but it's good to know the real meaning too. Nik widok hakoi, lead me. The verb widok hakoi means lead somebody, usually by the hand. Since it has no ending, what is it? A command. Who is the subject? You. Habom kuna, toward the back of the house. Kiwi is back, like even the back of your body. Kiwi. Habom kiwi is the house's back, or back of the house. Add na at the end, and it's towards the back of the house.
Heu. Che Dominic Madon Dominic Widok Hak Oi. Hobom Q now.
This is her blind uncle talking to her. Can you find the other dependent clause ending in dom besides adom? Nik ma don dom, holding me by the hand, or holding my hand. Okay, look all around, and while you're doing that, lead me toward the back of the house, holding my hand. You could improve that translation by saying, while you hold my hand. Let's listen to Herb Young saying a complex sentence.
Shiktini Wayidum Mutade Yahanu Ki Mapim Wiyekan.
What verb in the sentence shows who is the subject? Makare, does he. How do we know? Because of the kare ending, which we know is a question, and we know the subject is third person. He, she, it, or they. What do you think yahanuti means? Yaha is be good or correct. Nu makes it lasting, always be correct. T makes it causative. Cause it to always be correct. Sutini means one time, or even the first time. What does sutini wayado mean? Speaking one time, or speaking for the first time. How would you translate the whole sentence? Speaking for the first time, can he always get it right? How can you make the English sound a little better by adding one of our connecting words and the same subject as the mama bear? If he's speaking for the first time, can he always get it right? Or you could have said, when he's speaking for the first time, can he always get it right? Then Herb Young answers his own question, Wiyakan. The answer is no. Let's listen to him again and repeat after him.
Shiktini Wayadum Makade Yahanu Ki Mapim Wiyakan.
Now let's try translating sentences into Maidu, which is a little harder. Upe bisto means not doing anything or not being busy. Listen to Herb Young say upe bistom and repeat after him.
Pebistum. Pebistum.
How would you say, since I'm not busy, I'll read it? Upe bistom mechakino makas. Repeat. Upe bistom mechakino makas. What you're really saying is, not being busy, I will read it. Now let's try with the subject you. How would you say, since you're not busy, read it? Upe bistom mechakino maakano. Repeat. Upe bistom mechakino maakano. Or you could say, Upe bistom mechakino pi, or one of the other command endings. Now let's try it with the subject he. How would you say, since he wasn't busy, he read it? Upe bistom mechakinokan. Or if it was more than a day or two ago, you could say, Upe bistom mechakinokumam. Repeat. Upe bistom mechakinokumam. Since he wasn't busy, he read it. Practice with upe bistom. Think of anything someone might do if they aren't too busy. Just remember, when you make up your sentences, that whoever is not busy has to be the same person who's doing the action. We won't learn how to talk about two different subjects for another lesson or two. Now, remembering Herb Young's sentence, Sutini Wayadom Makade Yahanuti Mapem Wiyakan. Let's try changing out the subject from he to I. How would you say, when I'm saying it for the first time, am I always going to get it right? No. Sutini Wayadom Makares Yahanoti Mapem Wiyekan. Remember that Makares is the way I ask questions about myself. Am I always going to get it right? Makares Yahanoti Mapem. Now repeat. When I'm saying it for the first time, am I always going to get it right? Sutini Wayadom Makares Yahanuti Mapem Wiyekan. Now let's try some others. How would you say, since you're coming to town, visit me? Town di iedom nick chenakoi mankano. Repeat. Town di iedom nick chenakoi maankano. If you're going shopping, buy me some bread. Meto koidom nick mahati meto maankano. Repeat. Meto koidom nick mahati meto maankano. When he came here, he gave me this fish. Unidi uyedom unimako nick mekan. Did you give it to me because you didn't want it? Yahamendom nikmeka, or me yahamendom nikmeka. Repeat. Yahamendom nikmeka. I don't talk when I'm basket weaving. Weamenkas lolo histom. Repeat. Weamenkas lolo histom. Don't laugh while you're eating. Nukmen pedom. Repeat. Nukmen pedom. I'm going to post some homework on our Facebook page. The homework will be to practice what we've learned today. I'll also post the answers so you can correct yourself. Try to do them without the answers first. Once you know how to confidently say this type of sentence, memorize them. Next lesson, we're going to learn a few more endings besides dom for dependent clauses. Then you'll see how a Maidu sentence gets long and complex and expresses a whole sequence of events. This is where the mama bear starts having more than one cub. In Lesson 18, we'll learn what endings show that a dependent clause has a different subject than the main clause. Weaboskasi, Yahat bispada, Chaiman min chamakas.